Welcome to another live session of All About Trauma. For all our Instagram family, welcome as we wait for YouTube to come up. Today we have a very special guest, Qusai. He's actually a doctorate candidate at the Trinity College in Dublin. He's also working in the Department of Psychology and the Set of Health. So we're really happy to have you on for this very interesting discussion I'm going to have. So Nicolas, how do you think about our guest?
Yeah, for us, this opens a big topic because as we have been discussing about trauma, I have come to realize that if you want to be an expert in the field of trauma, you need to be an expert in the field of childhood as well, because all trauma is more or less, related to childhood development. So, Qusai, you're going to open up a door for us into the world of childhood through the lens of parenting, which is so interconnected, right? The web of parenthood and childhood, and then the adults that we become are so interconnected. And so I'm very excited about this opportunity and I can't wait to hear it from you.
Well, thanks for having me, Rene and Nicolas. I'm looking forward to our discussion today and the opportunity to talk about my work and my story.
Great. So I guess without further ado, Qusai, we'll give you some time on your own to explain how you got to where you are now in your life, and then we'll come back in later on in the live to ask you some questions, if that is okay. So take it away.
Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Qusai Khraisha. I'm a PhD candidate at Trinity College Dublin, my research is on refugee parenting. So today I'm going to talk a lot about that. But before I do, I thought of taking you on a journey with me from where I started, how I got into sort of studying this topic, because I think a lot of the learnings that I got from on refugee parenting came actually from those early experiences. So hopefully by sharing my story, I could share with you some of those learnings. So I was born in Jordan. For those of you who don't know Jordan, it's a country in the Middle East. It borders Syria, Iraq, Israel, and Palestine, and among other countries. It's a beautiful country. We have some beautiful cities and ruins. Petra is the most known one. But I lived in a neighborhood that was quite disadvantaged. So growing up in that, it was an industrial city in Jordan that I grew up in, and it was not a sort of the best neighborhood, I suppose. And I didn't know it then, but the neighborhood that I was living in actually had a lot of Palestinian refugees. The city that I was born in actually was one of the main areas that most Palestinian refugees who were displaced during the 40s and 60s, they came to that city. And I myself, I am Jordanian, but I have Palestinian heritage. So my grandparents are Palestinians. They moved to Jordan because of conflict, and they stayed in Jordan. And so I have these ties. And growing up in the neighborhood that I was in, this is not just a unique experience that happened to me. This is basically a very common experience in Jordan among people who with Palestinian heritage like myself, because Jordan actually hosted millions of Palestinian refugees. So and millions of people also became Jordanians. A lot haven't, still are Palestinians, but many have, and those basically share a similar story of mine. So I remember when I was growing up, I kept being asked this question, which was so annoying, which is, where are you from? and there's two answers to this. You can say I'm Palestinian or Jordanian. Now, of course, when this question is asked, it's asked always to people who with the Jordanian nationality, and but what it's trying to ask is like, you know, are you from like Jordan? Were you born in Jordan, or are you from Palestine and then became Jordan? Because if you're the latter, you're not as Jordanian as the former, I suppose. So, and this happened like since early on, like at school, as children would just ask these. So I don't know, for some reason that I remember that stayed with me, and I also remember the neighborhood that I grew up in. There was a lot of like violence in school and just around. Just didn't feel safe all the time, and you know, just children would like beat each other up unprompted, and I remember that feeling. I sort of stayed with me, and I suppose those were, I think, one of the earliest experiences that I had that I think led me to study and focus on what I'm focusing on at the moment. There are other experiences I'm about to share with you, but I think these are sort of primary. So, like I said, I grew up in Jordan, and I had these experiences, and I started. You know, I lived my life, and then I suppose at some point the Iraq War happened, around 2003, I believe, and so we started receiving a lot of Iraqi refugees, and I mean, at that point I was you know, teenager, and you know, suddenly we had a lot of Iraqi refugees, and so, you know, I mean, we didn't think of them. I didn't think of the people that I met as refugees because I really didn't understand who's a refugee and, you know, why do you become a refugee? And I mean, I understood there's a war, but that's pretty much it. You know, I didn't think beyond that. And, you know, it just so happened that, of course, when you have a lot of people coming into a country, then they start assimilating. And a lot of my then friends were Iraqi refugees. It just so happened they were in the same group and we started hanging out. And then I started getting really close. And I started hearing stories about the stuff that they gone through, the stuff they saw, the violence and the killing and the death. And of course, I mean, you know, it was troubling. And we didn't talk about it in depth. It would be just, you know, like we're hanging out late at night, and then there was, you know, a story. Me and my friend would share a story of you know, they were driving in the desert, and suddenly they hit like a bump road, and then my friend was asking, "What is that?" And they were like, "Oh, don't worry about it." And then you know, later on, she figured it was a dead body. It wasn't a bump in the road. So stuff like that you'd hear, and then it would just stay with me, and I didn't really understand how to react to it, how to kind of make sense of it. And so that happened, and then I suppose a few years later there was the Syrian war. Again, a lot of Syrian came to so that was in 2011. A lot of Syrian refugees came to Jordan. Same thing. Some, you know, had friends who were Syrians. They would tell me about their stories, and I remember there, actually, it wasn't them telling me about the stories of war and conflict that stayed with me, but a lot of the time I was hanging out because I think at that point I started figuring out, well, yes, people who come from who, you know, come from countries that have war, experience traumatic experiences, but then at that point I remember that there's a lot of people that I was hanging out with. They never really talk about anything that happened to them, but I remember feeling that there's something about sort of their day-to-day life that, you know, they were holding on to something. There was something that you know that I don't know, you know, if it's just in my imagination or something, but I felt that there was like this pain that was being carried, but not being spoken about. You can see it in the eyes. At least that's how I felt. And so, and also between the Syrian and the Iraqi, there was the Yemeni crisis, and so also I had friends from Yemen who were displaced, and I also, of course, at a point, I had also Palestinian. This is growing up with. I had Palestinian friends who lived in Gaza and left, of course, because of some of the family members were killed in the conflict, and again, I've heard stories, saw experiences that I didn't really understand, but I wanted to understand. And at that point, again, I mean, it's easy now to connect the dots looking backwards, but it's not so easy when you're in the moment. So that in that stage, having gone through these experiences and arriving to the point in which I wanted to decide what I wanted to study for my undergrad, I remember feeling a sense of sort of curiosity about things, about the world, because to me, I don't know, the world did not make sense. And I remember trying to convince my parents. I told them I want to study psychology because I'm curious about the world, and in order to understand the world, you need to start with the core, which is people. So I want to study psychology to understand the world, and that convinced them. And so I went on to study psychology, and I learned a lot. And then I left Jordan to London at this stage, and it was a phenomenal experience. Difficult, and I learned a lot about the I suppose what's it like to be in a different country, being a different as someone who's not from that same country, struggle to speak the language. Didn't see a lot of people like him there, and feeling like a bit alienated at times. So these were experiences that I never had before, because I was in my country. In my country, I was like, I knew people. I would just walk in the street and say hello to people. It was like easy, and I never felt lonely. And suddenly, like I'm in isolated place. Well, I felt isolated in a country that I didn't really understand. I mean, it was. I don't want to. It wasn't just challenges. It was, of course, exciting and wonderful and full of I was super feeling very privileged to be there to study the thing that I loved. But while I was doing that, I was also challenged. So it wasn't. It was an experience like, I guess, every experience, full of good and bad. And in it, but I learned what's it like, the difficulty, I suppose, of migrating. Now, after I finished my degree, I realized that the hunger, the curiosity that prompted me to study psychology wasn't actually fulfilled. There was something missing, and so after some reflection, I realized that what I really wanted to understand wasn't the world as such, but my world. Again, so thinking about those early experiences that I had, those early conversations, I realized that this is what I wanted to understand. How those experiences of war and conflict, how do they affect people, and how can we best support people who are affected by these experiences? Because those were the circumstances, the situations that I was faced in, that I felt helpless. People would tell me stories, didn't really understand the implications of them, and I didn't really understand what to say, and what can be helpful. So sort of having that connection in mind, and again, all this journey, going through it, not only was about understanding what I wanted to study, but also it was an increase in empathy and connection to the people that I'm serving at the moment, which are displaced people. Knowing the experience of like being exposed to a new place, a new country. Again, and this is just maybe generally to everything I say in this talk. I don't understand what's it like to be a refugee. I've never been a refugee myself, but these are the experiences that I have that can connect me to that experience in a way that the best way I can to understand it. So by no means, I know what's it like to go through displacement in a new country. It's not the same. I was privileged. I was going to London to study. It's definitely not the same. But but through migrating, I realized how difficult it can be, and I can only sort of extrapolate to how much it could be even more difficult if if I don't have the proper documentation, if I'm carrying the weight of war trauma, if I'm can't integrate well in the country that I'm in. It's immensely more difficult. But these experiences is how I started to connect with the cause, and so I suppose having done the realization that what I wanted to understand really is those war experiences, I decided to go to study my master's degree in King's College London, and it was focused on war and psychiatry. And I suppose between doing my undergrad degree and my master's, I did work for 3 years. And I'm going to talk about this work experience just after I talk about the master's experience, because it's relevant to something that is why I'm here at the moment doing my PhD. So when I was doing my master's degree at King's College London, I started to learn a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder, which I think my guess is many people watching this might be familiar with. So post-traumatic stress disorder is sort of it's a mental health problem that is directly tied to traumatic experiences. So it's quite relevant to the experience of war. People experience military violence. Most don't get troubled after it in the long term, but there's a significant minority that start having experiences like flashbacks, and they're unable to regulate their emotions or bodies, etc. And so those symptoms then are labeled as post-traumatic stress disorder. And I learned a lot about PTSD, what causes it, what's the factors that makes it less likely to happen, and etc., etc., etc. And in the back of my mind, I felt that this was a bit of a sort of it wasn't super appropriate to the context that I was familiar with, because a lot of the time, sure, I mean, people go through war or flee from war to another country, and they might be exposed to a lot of traumatic experiences, but a lot of the time they are still struggling. It's not like this, they left everything behind and now their life is fine. So how can we label their symptoms as post-traumatic stress, as something that these symptoms are existing after the stressful event happened, when the stressful event is still happening to them? So that did not make sense to me. And then I reflected on my work experiences, which I sort of skipped over. So between my undergrad and my master's, I went back to Jordan, and to tell you the truth, I it wasn't super sort of like that again, I know now I have a clear sense of purpose why I want to do things, but as a young person, I was just still exploring and didn't really understand what I wanted. And I want to tell you the honest story. I don't want to like tell you, it was all like clear for me in the beginning. No, when after I finished my undergrad, I was interested in research. I did some research projects. I found them fascinating, to sort of to discover something, and I like that process of like discovery and sharing knowledge. And so after I finished my undergrad, I did I worked in a research company that does like marketing research, trying to understand how media campaigns can be improved in a way to reach consumers better. And it was a good job. And of course, as a fresh graduate, getting a new job is it's great. Like, I'm not going to say no. But I remember like I didn't really enjoy it. It wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't something that I connected with. I didn't feel happy at the end of the day for many, many days. So it was then, it was a birthday party. I remember I was invited to a birthday party, and I was sitting and I met someone, and she was working at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And she told me about this job where, basically you get to listen to people, asylum seekers. You get to listen to their stories and decide whether they're refugees or not. And I found it to be fascinating. I mean, I love stories, and I get paid to listen to people's stories. Sign me up. So I applied. She told me there was a vacancy. I applied. I didn't get in, but I was, determined to try again. So I applied again, and I got in the second time. I started my job. So my job was to listen to people's stories, people who have left their countries seeking asylum, and to decide is their claim eligible for refugee status or not. And I listened to, I've met a lot of people from a lot of countries, and I've heard a lot of stories, and every story was unique. And as you can imagine, it was very personal and very, very difficult. And it was just a very emotionally challenging job. It was so fulfilling. I wake up every day with like strong drive. I never felt this driven in my entire life. And, just to do my job, it was like an amazing opportunity, an eye-opening opportunity, but it was super challenging to go through these experiences, to hear them, to carry that weight that they carried briefly, but I learned a lot just listening to people's stories. And in that interview, like when I was talking to people, I remember distinctly, because in order to decide who's a refugee and who's not, what matters is not the experiences that people are having at the moment. What matters is actually what happened to them when they left their country. That's how you decide if they are refugees or not, because you need to figure out if they go back to their country, are they going to be at risk? And there's, it's a bit more complicated than that, but I'm simplifying. But essentially, what matters is what happened to you, not what is happening at the moment in your country of asylum. So I remember, and why do I mention this? Because in their interview, a lot of the time when I was talking to asylum seekers, what they want to talk about is the now. They want to talk about the problems they're having at the moment. Like you can't get a job, you can't get school, bills, discrimination, whatever. All of these issues that are current. This is what mattered in their minds. But because my job, following my job, I was like, what I need to hear is what happened to you before. And so again, so now moving back to sort of my master's degree, this all sort of connecting together. All the my personal experience of like migrating, and sort of the experience that I had with hearing people's interviews, and also the stuff that I was hearing about PTSD. This is like all connected to me. There's a strong sort of Western lens of how we view the refugee experience, and I think it was quite like focused on sort of the war experiences. Even though while this is important, I think what was really neglected is the current experiences that people are facing, and even though they are really, really important to them. And it makes sense because PTSD came out after the Vietnam War, when there was essentially a lot of soldiers, American soldiers coming from Vietnam into the US. They were feeling troubled, and it makes sense in this context because these soldiers left the war, left Vietnam, and this is important. They went to their country, and generally speaking, there was safety and food and stable life. America is one of the richest places in the world. And so if they are still facing problems, well, it must be the problem that they face in the Vietnam. Therefore, post-traumatic stress disorder. But this doesn't make sense when you think about it in a situation where somebody was exposed to war, then goes to a country, no safety, not good food, you know, not much support. Like it's a different context. And so with this, I started to. I went to after this realization, I started to realize that I wanted to do further research to sort of maybe help shed light onto the experiences that I think is important, that I've kind of carried on. And so that's when I started my PhD, where I'm at the moment, Trinity College Dublin, with the view of considering essentially parenting. So, you know, I realized that, okay, you know, people who are exposed to war and conflict, they don't operate in a vacuum. You know, they operate within a social context. And personally speaking, a lot of the time that a lot of the people that I interviewed, those who the children were the ones, when I interviewed children in my job, there's something that I just, you know, it really hit deep. You know, I felt so, it's just so unfair for for a child, you know, who's supposed to have, you know, supposed to be playing, to go through war and conflict and be displaced. There was something deeply unfair about this. I mean, it's unfair to everybody, but especially for children. And so I really wanted to help children, displaced children. And then I thought that you know, children, you know, the best way to help to take care of children is to help their caretakers, the primary caretakers, so their parents. Which could be, of course, biological parents, but it could be any kind of parent who's primary caregiver. It doesn't have to be biologically related, and doesn't have to be a specific gender, etc. For the ease of simplicity of the conversation, I'm going to refer to parents, and because of my research, which was able only to sort of consider mothers and fathers, I'm going to talk about mothers and fathers, but by no means I am suggesting that parenting is something that is you know, biologically related, that has to do with like maybe the simplistic division of mother and father, and especially in refugee communities. Actually, there's a lot of in some communities there's usually, you know, you have cousins, grandparents who are responsible for parenting. Anyways, so that's when I started my PhD, and I started I joined a research project, and in which we collected data from about 300 Syrian refugees families in Jordan. And I suppose at this stage it might be nice to share a video that was shot during the data collection in the Zaatari refugee camp, which is partly where our data was from. So Rene, if you can pop that video on the screen, that would be super helpful.
Okay.
What I love about this video is it shows people just living their they're living their lives. Life continues, and even though a lot of these people have gone through horrific experiences, you can still like hear laughter and children, and just playing around. Even the camp setting is harsh. It's in an arid environment, but you can still you can see hope, and this is something I think that is beautiful. I think that is worth pointing out. And I think it's definitely, I am driven by by a need, the drive to sort of help address the issues that I'm seeing, the unfairness, but also by hope that things will get better, and that they are getting better. So that's just something to keep in mind. So about our research project, this is where it gets a bit academic. But about our research project, we looked at Syrian refugee families in the Zati refugee camp, which was what most of the video was shot there. But we also looked at the city, because people don't know. Generally speaking, I think the popular view is that refugees tend to live in camps, but actually, in some countries, most refugees don't live in camps. For example, in Jordan, most refugees live in the cities, so they're just embedded within the communities. And so most of our sample was from the city. We looked at essentially one of the key things I'm studying at the moment is parental interaction between the mothers, the fathers, and the child. And I did essentially. I looked at this in different ways. The first thing I did, I read the literature on essentially parenting in refugee settings, like thousands of articles, thousands. And you can imagine, when you think about it, actually, and I didn't realize that there'll be a lot of studies on refugee parenting, but there is, and they're quite, because parenting is such a sort of an interconnected topic. It's relevant to a lot of things, like food, health, nutrition, learning, and just the way the parents do stuff, what they say, what they do. Huge topic, connects a lot of things. So there's a big team of scholars around the world who have done research on these areas that I'm focusing on, which is parenting for refugees. And so my one of my research projects, the fundamental one, the basis is about understanding what has been done on the topic. And the context that I'm focusing on is the protracted refugee situations. So what I mean by that is refugees who have been refugees for a very long time. So again, this comes from the experiences that I had growing up, having a Palestinian heritage. I realized, and a lot of the people I met in my life from Palestine who were still refugees, they were refugees for generations. Some people were refugees who were displaced to Syria, then they were displaced again to Lebanon, and then again to Jordan. There are some refugees who not only been displaced for generations, but the same kind of family lineage has been displaced multiple times in multiple countries. And when I worked at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, a lot of the times, most of the people I met, they were asylum seekers for years. And I knew as well from working there that refugees on average stayed years as refugees. Actually, only, Jim, this is just a shocking fact, I suppose, that I think more people should be aware of. Only 1% of people get resettled after they become refugees. So what I mean, resettlement, for those of you who are not aware of what it means, is basically when a refugee, someone who's recognized as a refugee, because you usually you first enter as asylum seeker, and then if you are a refugee, then you get recognized. This is where my job was, between asylum seeker and refugee. And then the step afterwards, then you get resettled. So you move to usually a high income country like Canada, for example, is hosts a lot of refugees, or America. So when you go from, let's say, being recognized in Jordan as a refugee, and you go to America or Canada as a resettlement, that's usually the end of the experience of displacement, because once you arrive to these countries, it's just a matter of time when you eventually become a citizen. You get nationality, and when that happens, you cease to be a refugee. So most people, asylum seeker to refugee, and then refugee to resettlement, 1%. So meaning most people who are recognized as refugees, they stay as refugees. And from my research, I realized as well later that approximately 78% of all refugees live in protracted refugee situations, which is basically situations where refugees have been refugees for years. There's a technical definition in it, which I applied my research to be exact, but I think for the sake of this conversation, what you need to know, protracted refugee situations is just living in limbo, not knowing if you can go back, not knowing if you can stay. You're just so uncertain, and you are in this situation for years, sometimes generations. So it's difficult, and it's shockingly common. And I wanted to focus on it because it's the most common situation. And I wanted to look at parenting because it is one of the primary environment that surrounds the child. So if we can support parenting in protracted refugee situation, we can support effectively displaced children. So this is my PhD. My PhD is in parenting in protracted refugee situations. My first project is looking at all the literature that has been done on the topic, and we have published some work there that you can have a look. If you just look up parenting and mental health in protracted refugee situations, you'll find our work, which I'll talk about in a second as well. But just to tell you more about the other projects that I'm involved in, we did a qualitative study looking at co-parenting and displacement. So looking at how mothers and fathers work together, and as well, and so that is something that we also published, and you can have a look. And finally, the most recent work that I'm right now working on is a video data study, essentially recording mothers and the children interacting together, refugee mothers and the children interacting together. And so these are the main three projects I'm working on. And what we found was that, so here's the thing. When somebody experiences war and conflict, and I think most people fairly now are aware of this, which, by the way, it wasn't the common knowledge before, which is you might experience very traumatic experiences. Like somebody pointing a gun at you, shooting at someone you love or care about. And that causes mental disturbances, right? So I think most people now, I might be wrong, but I think generally this is general knowledge by now, which wasn't the case, in the 60s and the 50s. For some reason, that wasn't so apparent to us. So it's good. Again, progress happens slowly, but we are, as a collective, I think, understanding things better, having a more better empathy in some areas. And progress happens through hard work. It doesn't happen just because of time. So there's a lot of people who've done a lot of hard work to kind of get us to understand that traumatic experience can be troubling to our, psyche and our mental health. So, anyways, general knowledge. What I think less people know is that a lot of people who experience war or go through war, they never experience direct combat, or they never experience threat to their lives, immediate threats to their lives. And certainly, I can tell you, as a I suppose, an expert in refugee status determination. I had a job in it, and I understand really in detail the law of refugee law. You don't need to actually have had experience of direct combat or war to be recognized as a refugee. To be recognized as a refugee, what is the most important thing is the potential that things might happen to you in the future. So even though a lot of our attention is on traumatic experiences of war, many refugees never actually go through them. And actually, for them to be refugees, they don't have to go through them. So what is it that we're missing out? Well, what we're missing out is the current experiences of displacement. So these are, they're plentiful, but discrimination, racism, poverty, safety, and the list is very long. But these are things that are, extremely stressful and at times very traumatic, and they are ongoing. So they are not. It's not something of the past. And again, in the context of protracted refugee situations, they have been going for years, and it's when you look at the future, there's no sign of them dissipating. So this is something that my research highlights, is those ongoing stressors that we need to focus on when it comes to parenting. So it's moving away from looking at post-traumatic stress disorder and how it shapes parenting to current stressors and how they shape parenting. And this is one of our findings that we had, which is that what we found, and this is from the first research project, which is looking at all the studies. When we examined all, thousands of studies, and we picked the ones they looked at mental health and parenting. So they looked at that link in refugees and protracted refugee situations. What we found was that PTSD is important in the sense it affects the well-being of parents and their mental health. And war trauma is important because it leads to PTSD and affects the mental health of the parent. So I'm not saying it's not important, I'm saying it's important. But when it comes to parenting, there is not a clear link between war and the mental health PTSD with parenting. There's a link to well-being, but not parenting, the behavior. What matters to parenting more, from the research that we examined, is the common mental health problems like depression and anxiety that are a product of the ongoing stressors that the refugees experience. So this is in our systematic review paper, which we recently published, and we in addition we have shown that no matter where you go, okay, no matter whatever protracted refugee situation you go to, at least from the research that we examined, you always find that depression is common and affects parenting, and that makes sense, right? Like if you are in a protracted refugee situation, you don't know your future, you don't know how long you're gonna be as a refugee, and you don't know if you can go back to your country and spend years. You're gonna start feeling helpless and hopeless, and these are symptoms of depression. So, and this is I suppose the second, I think, important contribution of the work that we did, which is that protracted refugee situations, the fact that they exist, those situations, and the implications of them, they affect the mental health of the parents. Protracted refugee situations are the fact that these situations exist, the fact that the country is unable to provide, settlement opportunities for those people. And we found as well in these countries, usually refugees live in camps, so they can't leave as much as they want. And certainly if you are a refugee, you're not going to have as much rights and freedoms as a citizen. So those restrictions, they make you feel depression, sometimes anxiety, and then those mental health problems then change your parenting. So in other words, for a long time, a lot of the attention on what shapes parenting was very narrow. It's like looking at parents, looking at their mental health, looking at what parents maybe do when they without anything, and then what they do when they're stressed, and trying to maybe work within this space, maybe giving some educational advice or giving some mental health advice to change parenting. It was a narrow approach. What we did, we were like, let's widen our attention from the narrow, the individual, to looking at the context. We need to think about policies, and if these policies are not there, if they are the roots of the mental health problems, then we can't just address the mental health problems. We can't just put a sticker on the symptoms. We need to address the roots of the issue. And I think there's a nice analogy here that I like to think of as, imagine a car, and imagine parenting being the engine of that car. And so if you want to fix the engine, if you want to fix parenting, you fix the engine. But what if the problem is not just the engine? What if the problem is the cooling system as well? So i.e. here would be mental health. If you fix the engine without the cooling system, well, the engine is going to run for a bit, but then it's going to break out again. And this is actually one of the recent advancement in the field of refugee parenting. We're focusing just on the engine, and we need to focus on the cooling system, the mental health. And it's because these two elements work together like a system, right? And so it's very important to think of to have systems thinking when it comes to parenting, because it's like a car. It exists as a system. It's not an individual thing. Now, in our research, we're like, okay, well, maybe take a step behind and look at the road the car is moving on. If the road is broken, no matter how much you fix the engine and the cooling system, well, the car is going to break down because the road is broken. The policies, the systems in which the refugees are operating in. So this was, I think, a key contribution of the paper that we published recently. The second work that we've done is about mothers and fathers, and this was born actually on the when it comes to parenting, and this is something generally the issue in just parenting. When thinking about parenting, we think of parenting as what mothering or mothers do, and these are just biases that we have, stereotypes, and that certainly is reflected in the literature on parenting among refugees. What we did, and we, after examining the research, we realized as well there's some focus on fathers. There has been some attention given to fathers, but what was completely missed was how fathers and mothers work together. Because remember, it's never really like mothers are doing something in isolation and fathers are doing something in isolation. No, they work together. So so the second paper that we have published is on co-parenting, refugee co-parenting, and the exact title of it is Co-parenting, Mental Health and the Pursuit of Dignity. And so here is one of the aims of the paper is to change the narrative from just saying mothering or fathering, but to talk about co-parenting. And our paper was focused on mothers and fathers, but co-parenting, of course, is extends beyond the traditional sort of parental figures of mothers and fathers. It involves any primary and secondary caregiver in any situation. It's never one person that's parenting the child alone. It's two or more. And so it's important to think about this dynamic. And this is extremely important in displacement situations, because when a key thing about people working together is their ability to communicate and negotiate, and we talk about this in our paper. And imagine you have gone through experiences that that the refugee have gone through. Now, again, I'd never gone through these experiences. Many of you have not watching this, but let's just take this mental exercise of going through horrific experiences, usually involving other people trying to hurt you. So this is at the core of a refugee experience: persecution, right? Persecution happens from people. So imagine people like out there wanting to harm you enough to you to leave the country. Then, well, how is that make you relate to people in general? How is that affect your relationships to this is something that trauma does to people, right? It breaks that social bond, the social trust that we have. A lot of the times things become not just traumatizing, but they cause mental health problems because they break our understanding of the social reality of the things that if somebody who's very close to me, this is why somebody like a personal trauma, if you get if you have a traumatic experience from a loved one or someone who's very close to you, that is much more likely to cause you a disorder than if you had it from a stranger, because it touches on a fundamental belief that we trust people that we love. If that is shaken, then that is really deeply troubling to us. So when it comes to refugee experience, a lot of it is people who for example, in the case of the Rwanda genocide, and I'm not going to go into details, but you can read about it. Some of the time, neighbors turned into on each other and started killing each other. So those experiences, having to believe that somebody's after you, to believe that they are, and a lot of the times people that maybe or you trust. Well, what's that to do to you? It's going to break your trust in people in general. And so when you are in a situation of parenting, when you have to work with other people, and you have that experience, and breaks your trust, then it's going to be very hard for you to negotiate and talk and communicate, right? And so we highlighted this. We highlighted that co-parenting is fundamental to parenting, and by doing so, I think we are adding to interventions, because interventions on refugee parenting didn't pay much attention to this, to the communication that's happening between the parents. They would just teach out of the mother, now recently the father, but not the communication, even though it's fundamental and especially relevant to sort of refugee setting. In trauma, as I explained, but also, of course, imagine in displacement, which is what I'm trying to kind of as well highlight more in my work. And I'm not just alone in this, of course. There's other people who are part of this mission. You can read the works of Kenneth Miller. He's leading this, I think, research on looking at ongoing stressors that affect refugee mental health. And so co-parenting is important as well for ongoing displacement, because people who are going through discrimination, racism, internalize this, and they might reflect this also on the personal relationships. Not all the time, but sometimes. So the current project that I'm working on, beyond these three, which is the video data, was born out of necessity of when you think about parenting, maybe many people here watching this will not be researchers or will not think about parenting. But I want to ask you, if you ask somebody about parenting, just generally, is there a chance that they might maybe over-exaggerate how good of a parent they are? I think that is a highly possible, especially in the context of parenting, and we know that from the literature. That's sometimes people do maybe say things in a socially desirable way, especially in a topic that is sensitive like parenting, where a lot of the times, if being a bad parent is not necessarily acceptable at all, or being perceived as one is not a good thing. So people have an incentive to not be fully accurate in their representation. So, but the problem is, most of the research on refugee parenting, like 99% of it, is on surveys. It's asking people to report, self-report. So there's a huge risk for sort of what we know is what the participants want us to know, rather than maybe the reality. And furthermore, and this is maybe just beyond just asking about parenting in general, this is more specific to sort of refugee parenting. The traumatic experiences that might happen to you from your country of origin, as war or conflict, or the ongoing experiences, these affect your ability to remember things well, right? It distorts your perceptions sometimes. And so not only, I think, when you study refugee parenting, not only there's a risk of socially desirable responses, there's a risk of inaccurate, false responses, basically, simply because of trauma affecting perception or recall, or especially mental health problems. For example, depression. It's not just about post-traumatic stress disorder. Sometimes depression, anxiety. We have so much evidence that shows that these change your perception of the world, including your child. So our study is creating a way for us to understand parenting by observing it through video interaction. So we're creating a system to do that. And this study is currently in review. And our system is basically called Observational Behavioral System Evaluating Synchrony and Sensitivity, short for OBSESS. And it's a way of looking at the mother, how sensitive and responsive she is to her child, and then also the relationship, the synchrony between them, how synchronous and harmonious their interaction are. So this is where we are in research stuff that we're doing, and I suppose I can maybe pause here to call on my guests here. I did go on and speak for a long time, so thank you for listening, being patient with me. Thanks.
Yeah, very good, Qusai. I'm very touched. I don't know about you, Rene, but there's a lot to discuss for sure. So thank you for the effort that you put into exposing some of the important elements of research that you're covering, some of the important changes in scope and understanding of some of the most popular concepts in this field, including what PTSD is, where really the accent should be put in terms of our analysis and concerns about protracted refugee situations. I also very much appreciated you giving us a background on how you actually came into this field. That was not just entertaining, but also touching. One question that came up for me was trying to imagine who your family was. So you were meeting, because really the question was, why is Qusai in particular making friends with all these refugees? Is this something that you could not avoid? Is this something that everybody would do? Or is this something that you were particularly sensitive to from the very beginning?
It's a brilliant question. I don't know why things happened the way they did. Certainly not everybody. I mean, there was, just by Jordan hosts a lot of refugees, millions, and so it's not a coincidence that a lot of I rubbed around people who have gone through experiences of war, but I think there's something about the way I responded to people who have gone through experiences that invited them to be close. And I think that I wasn't fearful. I think when we hear about things that are maybe shocking in a negative way, or things that we don't understand well, I think we tend to sort of, maybe unconsciously or subtly, we tend to sort of want to step back, a bit back, run away, not listen.
Sure.
Yeah. And I don't think I did that. I always had an open mind to things, and I leaned in when I didn't understand. I didn't shy away. And I think that was, I mean, I'm not sure, but I think that was maybe one of the reasons that, not maybe that I met and I had a lot of friends who were displaced, but the reason that they became sometimes my best friends. Because I didn't, I didn't let the experience maybe divide us. Yeah.
Which is such at the core of trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, is the experience of isolation. It's the split in the psyche that happens, and that is then normalized, right, throughout the lifespan of that person, until they begin to look at that split and to reintegrate the elements of pain and suffering and the memories that they carry. I imagine this space where you're not able to connect with yourself anymore is somewhat in an echoing relationship with the refugee camp itself, where a lot of things cannot be said and done in these environments, as I hear it. People are helpless and hopeless in a way, because they cannot move back, right? They cannot withdraw and move back to something familiar. There is no chance in that move. They cannot move forward at will. They cannot seek new solutions. They're there confined in this space, and so this limbo sort of place is also a place that I find many of my clients to be in when they come and try to work with me. They are in a place where they are confused. They don't know where to go anymore. They are afraid of looking back. And so they are in a space where they need help, and they need to be held, sort of in their moving towards that which they fear the most, which is usually their memories of this and that abuse, let's say. What do you think? I'm just sort of brainstorming here with you about this analogy.
I think it's a powerful analogy, and it resonates a lot with the experiences that I've had. You made me remember a time I was walking down in the reception when I was working at UNHCR, and I remember walking down. We have a reception area where when an asylum seeker has an interview, they come there, and then they wait until we call them. And so when there's an interview, I go down and I look for the person I'm interviewing, and then I meet and I call them, and then we go to the room. But so in the process of looking around, I remember there was a day when I was looking for the person, and then I just saw it, and then I could not unsee it. Like, everybody there was waiting, and there was no hope. They're all, their shoulders were lumped. They're looking down, and it was just so, I felt it, that there's, the situation they're in. I don't know, that moment I saw it. Also in that moment, I saw there's some children playing, because they didn't really think about the past and the future. They just, thought about the moment. And so, I suppose in my work, what was very important is finding how parents maybe could accidentally channel in these negative emotions to their children, and by understanding it, maybe kind of cutting that maybe negative sort of helping to mitigate that sort of negative influence. But the first step is to be aware of it, and in doing so through research, then we can maybe inform the parents through intervention. But it's a I mean, you touch on something very important and at the heart of the refugee experience, that I think, which is the uncertainty of it all, and that I think that that's something very on point that you said, that fear of like looking back, and maybe also, and then we have that uncertainty, and then you're just confined. It's a kind of a prison, right? And you can't really move, you can't go back, you can't go, and it's, I think, but I mean, I'd like to be sort of hopeful. I think there are problems, and I don't want to undermine them by saying that by maybe focusing on the positive aspects, because you do see a lot of resilience as well. It's not like, people have a lot of brilliant people who contributed a lot of things to our society have been refugees. I mean, it has been said over and over.
Yes.
A lot of the times adversity bring people together. A lot of, and so there are beautiful things that happen when people experience adversity, and they happen when we connect and we love each other, and we understand, and that happens when we understand each other. So I think positive change happens, and actually we can do a lot individually. We can, first of all, learning about the experiences allow us to understand them better, and when we understand something better, we empathize with it better. And you never know it, but you might meet somebody who is gone through war, or maybe doesn't have to be war, any difficult experiences, and that's just knowing. And this is actually where I think one of a very, very amazing contribution of this podcast is by sharing this knowledge about trauma experiences. You kind of making people more aware, which spreads love essentially. And if we have more love in the world, I think people can be stronger, because we do actually derive a lot of our strength from the people around us. A lot of our strength comes within, but really what makes people strong is the people around us, and so yeah.
Yeah, two things here for me before I give the word to Rene, who might have a question, I guess. One is that you mentioned the word prison, and right in that moment, actually, I was connecting back to the prison experiment of Zimbardo, this famous experiment that was conducted in the 60s, where these psychologists took some students out of a random sample of university students, and dividing them into prison guards and prison mates, and basically confined them to a basement, and gave the prison guards sticks, and they gave to the prison mates, costumes, like the typical things. And the experiment was going to run for something like 3 weeks. And they had to call off the experiment 1 week in, because the prison guards are turned into this Abu Dhabi type of behavior, where they were beginning to physically, violently abuse the prison mates. There were no prisoners there. They were all freaking innocent. But suddenly, just by being put in a context with low level of lights, with confinement, with isolation embedded in this environment, with a power structure that made the actions of abuse possible, all these things happened. These were normal student kind, normal adults on both sides, and yet very quickly, within a week, they started to express the same behaviors that we see in prison. So that says something about context, how context affects the psychology of people, right? So what do you expect from people who are confined, physically confined, and who psychologically cannot address the past? They physically cannot move towards the place of origin where they come from. So psychologically also there is a stuckness there. You cannot go back physically, you cannot go back psychologically. Actually, it's almost an incentive for not going back psychologically if you cannot move back physically there, right? A lot of the journeys of closure and return and healing, if you're aware of it, come from actually the person saying, I'm going to go back, like I did, for example, to the lake where my sister died. I'm going to go back and see where I lived when I was a little kid, when my parents had to flee because the Nazis were coming in. Right? This sense of closure, we achieve it by moving back to these familiar places and renewing the way that we look at them. So this is not an option for them. And then the future is being cut off from them and removed from them, just like in the prison experiment, because some authorities are in control of their futures. I spoke last week, we were talking about the ACE test, Adverse Childhood Experience test, and the last question of that test says a member of your family has gone to prison. So we were talking about the prison and the experience of prison and the stigma that is attached to that. And I just lost my train of thought now, suddenly. But the prison, yes, this sense, because I went to prison twice in my life. Once because I was an immigrant who broke some rules inadvertently without knowing. So immigration police took me in and told me I had 24 hours to leave the country. And one was in Turkey because I inadvertently crossed a military path and walked on a military path, and also I didn't know, and so they arrested me and so on. And so on both occasions, I was held captive, let's say, for about a day, less than a day, but no more than a day, basically. How humiliating that experience is, I can't tell you. It's like being stripped of everything. Well, literally, they stripped me of everything, all my possessions, but also psychologically, I was completely stripped of my power to enact my agency in the world. It's so humiliating. Like within a day, I'd fallen into depression at some level, without exaggerating. It's incredibly humiliating, incredibly devastating to the psyche. So for people to be in those situations ongoingly, what do you expect other than hopelessness and helplessness? Yeah, so I just want to share that at some level. I think that's very important.
No, thank you for sharing. I think it's the experiences that you shared. I think tell some. They show. I think they some of the core. They touch on the core experiences. I think that a lot of the displacement gives. I mean, again, I think you highlighted that sort of being robbed from your freedom, right? How can that sort of break down the natural process of recovery? When you talked about closure and how our tendency to sort of maybe move on things is maybe by visiting them again, and when you can't do that, how that it's breaking out the natural healing process, and it's taking away that light in the future. And all the times when we face adversity, we say, okay, well, things will get better in the future. I'll just focus on the future. But that's also being robbed away from you. And I think you in your stories, I think you bring out something that is very difficult, I think, to maybe explain. But I think you eloquently kind of did so in the stories that you shared, is that it's not people. You can take people's freedoms not just by physically constraining them, but constraining them in their minds, right? If they can't see a future, if they can't see a past, that's prison, right? And I really loved the Zimbardo story that you shared, because it shows us as well a very important process that is happening, that can happen on a societal level, of the prisoners and the guards, how they can be the same people randomly picked from a population, and just when they start thinking, and this is what happened in the Zimbabwe prison experiment, they start thinking that something about them brings them together and pushes them further away from the other group. When they start othering people, that's when problem starts to happening. And that's what when the guards started hitting the prisoners and humiliating them, when they thought of them as different. And this is, in my experience is going, and a lot of the people that I talked about with today, they don't like being called a refugee. And most, I'm yet to meet a person who is proud of being being called a refugee.
Yes.
Because they don't want to be othered, right? And that's what our society is doing. It's othering, and that's the opposite of love and connection. Beautiful. It's the other people.
Yes, beautiful. And it comes back to what you were doing as a child. You were not othering them.
Yeah.
Exactly. Qusai, I actually want to come in and just highlight one thing you also mentioned when you were a child. You said that you were able to see something in their eyes that was not told. Of the stories you used to hear, there were some stories you didn't hear and you could see it in their eyes. And I'm just curious, even as you are doing your job, could you still notice it as you are interviewing these people? Maybe it sounds like your passion for the job and your passion for the position might be different from your colleagues who are doing the same thing. And the fact that you're able to connect and recognize some of these stories that were not seen in their eyes, what do you think is the role of other individuals in your state, maybe in the position, the privilege you had to be in those positions, working for the UNHCR, seeing the positions as maybe just another job, but you're actually dealing with people going through different circumstances. How would you say is their role when it comes to showing that compassion and recognizing some stories that they wouldn't necessarily just say?
It's a good question. It's a difficult one to answer. I think to kind of answer, to make sure that I am answering your question correctly. You're basically asking about how do we pick the right people for the job in a way to deal with the refugee experiences, and how do we make sure that they are empathetic towards the people that they are serving? Am I correct in sort of phrasing the question this way?
Yeah, what I'm hearing is, Rene, that you're asking, do the people that are performing that job have a bigger role in their lives?
Do they understand their bigger role? Because before, maybe you as that female friend told you at the birthday party, like you're just going to be having questions, but experiencing it's much bigger than that. How do you get to understand the vastness?
Even this experience that you were telling us, Qusai, where you go downstairs and suddenly you notice everybody's shoulders hanging down. I mean, that speaks of something, that speaks of an awareness that goes beyond the necessity of you just going downstairs, calling somebody, taking them up. Something is happening. And honestly, actually, I like that you asked this question, Rene, because when you were telling about these things, Qusai, I saw some shininess in your eyes, when the word children came. So that really touches you, doesn't it? So there is something there that goes beyond what you have served in your profession.
It's a brilliant question, and I think my take on it, and this is a belief that I have, I think people generally, there are rare exceptions to everything, of course, but I think people generally are good, and they want the best for other people, generally speaking. So, but I think what happens is that the systems that they operate in, kills that in them. And this is one of the things that actually frustrated me and made me leave UNHCR. It's like, for example, my job is like, okay, deciding on a refugee, but then you're only focused on that. You don't care. It will be harming your job if you focus on other things, because you wouldn't have time to focus on your thing, right? And so there's a damage there if you so the system is making you be narrow, right? And this is, it goes back to the way that when we started the Industrial Revolution, and we started, being specialized. And I think it's kind of, the reason we did it. It's very productive and it makes us, But when you think about it, a lot of the approach in the humanitarian field, it takes from these industrial approaches, but it takes away from the humanity of it. It takes away from what we actually want to provide, which is like, dignity and to people, to have them to live in a dignified life. When we are asked to sort of like reach deadlines and do them, which would make sense maybe in a company creating like phones or something, but in a humanitarian situation, like sometimes you might need to spend like a lot of time with just one person, because that's what matters. So and I think that in my situation, I saw a lot of my colleagues who have spent years in the humanitarian sector. Not all of them, some of them, they were able to maybe have a positive impact and change maybe some things in the system, but a lot of the times they changed themselves. They started having compassion fatigue. They were like, well, like, if I start being empathy is weakness, and I'm not gonna like be empathetic because I'm gonna get like a bad review in my job and I'll lose my job, and like, I don't want to. Just to be clear, I think we need to be careful in sort of judging these people, because sometimes they have a family, and like, if it's between feeding their kids and maybe not being the most compassionate person to a refugee. I understand. It's a difficult trade-off, and I think we need to be. But what's important, I think, is rather than like focusing on people, I think we need to focus on systems. We need to change the institutions and how they operate and how they work, and not to evilize like the institutional system. We need institutions. I think a lot of the times we do create systems inadvertently in a way that they are eventually harming. So it's not about, a lot of the times, maybe it's just about us taking some time to re-engineer and reflect and maybe think about the institutions and how they work. And so, in other words, not to blame any person, not to say that, okay, somebody wants harm or, institution or people, but I think we need to be aware of the way the systems are now in making people too narrow, and maybe, and in doing so, they're not really serving refugees and other displaced persons, and maybe just vulnerable people in general, in the way that they should, and potentially sometimes causing harm. We need to sort of think about this, and it's a complicated issue. I don't want to simplify it. It's an extremely complicated issue. There's a lot of dimensions to it, but certainly it's to me it's less about choosing the right person and more about creating the right system. Because you can choose the right person, and then that they would change according to that system, and yeah. So that would be my view. But excellent question, I think. Yeah.
Rene and I were talking on the background a few days ago about how Western philosophies are very look at nature in a very objective way. Like, nature is an object to be first of all feared, and then that fear is overcome through analysis, understanding, and naming, right? We need to be able to name, we need to be able to categorize, we need to be able to break down nature in order for us to trust it. So only when we have come to that point and we can manipulate and control it at our own will, then we can trust nature, the world. Nature is the world, the earth, the forces of nature, including human beings that we don't know. Whereas in the context of Kenya, for example, maybe Rene, you can tell us how nature is seen. There is a much more relational relationship to nature. If Rene speaks of the land, right? The land is a subject that has agency of its own. The land is taking care of Rene, and so Rene is relating to the land at an equal level, and so feels compelled to take care of the nature. nature has agency. Nature is a being, is a subject, not an object of analysis. Rene, please give us a bit more of these reflections in your own words.
Absolutely. We feel we are extension of, and nature is an extension of ourselves. We actually connected it, and we need that symbiotic relationship whereby we feed it and it feeds us, so that even when we deal with the animals, we let them be in their habitat, and even as we get to relate in our own residency and with them, the more care and more compassion we're able to give them, the more they're able to feel the same to us. And it's such a very insightful discussion I had with Nicolas, and I really enjoyed it. In fact, it even goes to my next question, possibly, that as you're talking about the systems, how will it benefit? It sounds like this process of the refugee and the protracted refugee, it actually helps the host nations, maybe the system, right? I just want to know, how will it benefit the host countries to actually get a different perspective of the individuals in this process? For this, the same way I got to discuss with Nicolas, and I got to share with him how it will benefit the West to see nature as an extension of themselves, whereby they're able to really enjoy from this fellowship, as I have enjoyed for all of my life. How would it help the countries to see that?
And let me clarify why we are talking on this topic, because what I'm pointing to is that Western philosophies and cultures are rooted on this fundamental split between the subject and the object. They have separated themselves in their view of nature and see nature as a non-agentic, an object without agency, an object that is devoid of spirit. And in a sense, the Zimbardo experiment was an experiment that led people to see each other's others as others. The job that you're describing also leads people to see the refugees as others, not as an us, right? So maybe we have created systems that very much in the Western spirit lead to us experiencing the world as other and separated from us all the time.
Yeah, I think both of you touch on very interesting points related. They're both related, I suppose, in the sense that we need to. There's something about our core belief in the way that we generate knowledge, which is primarily comes from the West, about that in order to understand something. And this is, I think, the nice thing that you highlighted, Nicolas, is that we need to first think of it as something separate from us, so we can understand it well. But in that process, we were talking before, there's a risk there, because when you other something, you start also losing it, its humanity and its kind of like qualitative experience. And so because of the way we generate knowledge, we're creating systems as well that in order to serve somebody, and just to other that person, and in doing so, as Rene you nicely put forward in your question, we are essentially not serving well these people, and because we're not looking at we're not looking at them as people, as individuals. We're looking at them as this kind of abstract thing,
a problem to be fixed.
Yeah, and I think there is, to answer your question, Rene, I think the like, what is the benefit of this? I suppose the way it is, I think I would reflect on my personal interactions. The people that I don't see as different, well, I'm not going to connect to them, and those that I see that I can see common connections with them, these are the ones that we will form a better bond. Now, when it comes to children, this is the essential, like, life ingredients that they need for them to flourish. I mean, if they live in societies that are surrounded by institutions that are essentially creating disconnect between people, well, they're not going to flourish as children. Their parents are not going to flourish; they're going to struggle, and in return as well, the children are not going to flourish. if we have a big chunk of the population, and this is essentially, when you look at the numbers, the refugee numbers, not just refugees, but displaced people in the world, 120 million people are now currently displaced. By the end of this year, it's estimated there's going to be 131 million. So, I mean, this is like more than populations of entire countries. Yeah, I think it's the population of Spain and France combined. It's a staggering number, and I think it's very hard when numbers become so big. It's very hard to understand like how big, what actually they mean.
And you're saying 99% of them will remain in that situation for long periods.
Yes, exactly. 99%. Yeah, like yes, that. So the majority of them will be forever displaced, and they might not only that, but they might have children who themselves will have children who will be displaced. I mean, we have reached this point, and so if a big portion of the population, and when we say 120 million, we're saying essentially that translates to 1% of the entire world population. If 1% of the entire world population is not flourishing, well, that's going to have huge consequences. And in countries like my country, Jordan, that could represent a third or half of the population. In Lebanon, it's certainly half, and but also in Germany, for example, we have like 1 million or so Syrian refugees. But many other countries, it's thousands of people. So if we are not creating the conditions for them to flourish, I mean, that's going to have we're all connected. Economies are connected, so that's going to have consequences on if you want to take the economic perspective, well, there's plenty of reason to sort of help refugees to make the economy flourish, right? Because they, again, there are Steve Jobs, his parents were refugees from Syria. People don't know that, but not his parents then put him for adoption, but his biological parents are Syrian refugees. So he then went on to build the biggest company, most evaluated, highly valued company in the world. So here's one clear example. I mean, not just in terms of business, education. Einstein was a refugee, right? This is like common knowledge, right? He's one of the greatest minds of our times, right? So, but also, of course, I think putting all this, putting this aside, I think beside the economy and the education, we also have a moral responsibility to serving people. And so, if we are creating systems that are not serving the best interest of the people, I think there are many reasons, a lot of things that we can gain by changing the system to maximize it. A lot of value in it. That takes time, and I think that's the problem. I think usually governments and funders don't have the patience. Programs are very short, and to see the effects of something, yeah.
At the end of the day, I mean, water has to be transported to the refugee camps. Yeah. Problems have to be fixed and solved every day. In fact, have you ever lived for any length of time in these refugee camps? Have you ever lived there for a night or for 2 days? Have you ever visited?
No, I haven't. I visited refugee camps, but I haven't lived in one. Yeah, I mean, it's.
Because I know from every day there are hundreds of little problems to be fixed, and
yeah, of course. I mean,
to be repaired.
Yeah, I mean, there's from my research, I also know that there's a lot of you have risk from food shortage, and I mean, in countries where there's really like low resources, there's not really any facilities, any infrastructure. I mean, usually refugee camps are never made to be permanent, but because most refugees stay refugees and they never leave, they become then permanent residents. You talk about the Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, host over 1 million, one refugee camp hosting almost 1 million people.
Wow.
Talk about
Jesus
Yeah,
Christ.
like Pakistan, refugees have been there for generations, hundreds of thousands. And when these in my country, we have cities that are camps, like the Baqa camp, for example. It's a city now, but it's a camp. It's where Palestinian refugees came when they were displaced, set up tents. Century tents started becoming makeshift sort of caravans, and then buildings, and now it's technically it's the camp. Most people live there as refugees, but it's slowly became a city. So I guess sorry, what I wanted to mention is that there's a lot of risk of sexual violence as well. This is something that for example, a lot of women and children, they get molested when they try to get food from, let's say, nearby forest or something, try to get wood. Toilet is a big thing in refugee camps because there's usually you have to leave your tent to go to a toilet, and then there's not much lighting, so that there's a lot of sexual violence that happens there. So it's definitely not a way of living. People never like living in camps. It's usually, even though there's sometimes a lot of support, like for example in Jordan, the Zata refugee camp has a lot of organizations supporting refugees, but the families want to leave and be in the city, even though there's less support there. But they have more freedoms in the camp. They can't leave and come in the way that they wish. So I suppose there's this is something like a lot of the times people think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I think there's some truth to it. Yeah, of course. I mean, there are some essential needs that we have as well, but I think there's there's a risk of being misled by thinking of needs being hierarchical. I think some people who don't have food on the table, to them, their dignity matters as well. If the way you give them food will matter. It's not just that you give them food, but how you give them food.
Insight.
So, yeah, and I think that's why a lot of the times the camps have a lot of support, but people want to go to the city, even though they have less support, but because they at least they have more dignified life, a life that they can have more control of.
Actually, coming back to the issue of parenting, sorry, Rene, I know I'm aware of time. We'll have to close in 20 minutes or so, and I really want to talk a little bit more about parenting. And perhaps, is there a way that through the stories that you have heard from all the refugees you have interviewed and your research, that you could take us through a day in the life of a co-parenting situation?
Yeah, I mean, we have our paper on it, and I remember some of the stuff that the parents have mentioned to us. So we one of the key things that we talk about when it comes to co-parenting is negotiating. And so when in families that have good negotiation skills, remember, like a mother would say something like, he listens to me when I ask him to do things, and the father would say that we have each our roles. And so when I picture myself in this household, I see a mom sort of waking up in the morning, fixing the bed, making food, and then doing her part, and or a house where the father is waking up in the morning and doing the household stuff, because the mother can leave the camp, where if the father leaves the camp, he will be assaulted by somebody. So in this situation, and actually this is a common situation where there's a role reversal between the mother and the father. So in this situation, in a household that can maintain good communication, the mother, when she comes home, the father and the mother would be able to talk about their day, and if, let's say, the kid breaks something, and they would be able to sort of handle the situation. If it was a stressful day, they would say to each other, do you mind if we wait until the kid sleeps to talk about this, or can we go to another room, if there is another room in their house, to talk about this. And so they would have empathy with each other. They would listen, even though the father feels his pride was taken because he's not working anymore. He's able to talk about these emotions, and the mother would understand these, and through this process, the family becomes connected better. Through this difficult experience, they understand themselves better and become more of a unit. On the other hand, if imagine in a situation where the father has to stay home, but he doesn't like it. He doesn't like it at all. He's like, and he blames the mother for his situation. He's like, it's your fault. It's she works all day. She comes back. He's fighting with her. He's like, I'm not having it. I'm not. And then because he's feeling insecure about his manhood, and he wants to show it. So he starts hitting her, and they're hitting each other in front of the kids. So the kids see this, and they're like, well, this is how I should behave in front of other. This is this is my standard of relationships. If I see this, then this is how things should be. So when the child leaves the house, he then meets his or her friends, and they, when they're playing,
engage in a fight.
The other child. Yeah, and then they start having problems outside. The neighbors bring the parents. The neighbors and the parents don't get along, so the parents become even more isolated. And through this experience, the family breaks apart. The longer there's a connection, adversity has broken the family. So, in that way, I suppose these are two examples of how could co-parenting can effectively really maintain the family's dignity and brings it together. And in another family, it's when there's no co-parenting, essentially, it breaks the family apart.
And I've learned through my work with my clients that sometimes clients will prefer, and in fact, we have talked about this before, Rene, with this sort of friend or person that who said that she would prefer a man that can beat her rather than a man that cannot. And sometimes we actually prefer violence to boredom or to hopelessness and helplessness. Like to become numb, it's a very, very hurtful experience, and we try to resist that numbness a lot. And as we've said before, if we are in this limbo situation, being in a limbo also means not going anywhere, and that means not feeling anything really also. And so it's the perfect place to create discord in a way, just to avoid this process of a downtrend, which would ultimately lead to perhaps suicidal ideation and very, very, very heavy depression. I wonder how many suicides go on in these camps. Is the suicide rate higher than the average population?
I think that's a very important question that I think needs to be asked more, because there is a very, very limited research on this topic. And I think this is very actually difficult topic to research, because the most prominent religion for displaced people are Islam, and in it, it's technically not allowed, right? So there's a stigma around even talking about it because of these religious sort of beliefs. But it happens. But we don't know how much. I mean, the studies range, I think, in prevalence between 2% to
yes.
80 or 90%, because there's very little amount of studies, and they're not really done well when they're done. But it's just so it's very important. It's to research more and to research also when it doesn't happen. I mean, I think there's something there as well, like to understand. But yeah, I wish I had the answer for you. But I think if somebody is interested in research, they don't know what to do about which topic, and this is something that they could feel like they could sort of contribute meaningfully to this field. I think this is a very important subject to think about and do more research on, for sure.
So kind of in conclusion, what we're saying is that people in protracted refugee situations are very much in a psychological limbo space. This psychological limbo space is defined by an inability to look back at their suffering and an inability to imagine their future. And that in this limbo, the chances of not being able to negotiate with your partner to take proper, responsible, attuned parenting action is higher than in the general population.
Yeah, and in addition as well, because you lack this control over your life, then you take it out on your children by being violent, because you want to create that control through violence on your children, or harshness. Yeah,
I agree.
But I think well said. Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to ask Qusai, what are some of the things a normal person can do to, when we get to experience and meet, because eventually we will meet one of these 130 million people. And I really like how you started the story that you grew up in a place whereby where are you from? Are you Jordanian or are you someone from? So how does the normal person work on this information? Should they have a different approach when they meet someone who doesn't look like them, or somehow even looks like them? Should they have that question, are you one of us, or are you one of us who came here? How should we approach that?
I think the best way is really like seeing, having an open mind and seeing the person as a person, as a different person. Because what these questions are, when people ask me like, where are you from, Jordan or Palestine? They know that I'm from Jordan, but they want to make sure, am I like Jordan, Palestine? What they really are asking is like, which box do I put you in? Okay, which knowledge of experiences that I've already decided on, which one I need to put you in. And so if we have an open mind, if we see the person from as a human, we don't ask these questions, because no human fits in a box, right? So I think if we from the core of ourselves, I believe be open, and I think that this then takes the conversation goes away, takes care of itself at all. So like, you don't have to ask a specific question, or just having that belief, you enter the conversation in a different way. You suddenly you ask open-ended questions. You want to listen. You want to hear. You see the person as the experience. You don't see them as a refugee, because no refugee is the same. Every person is different. I mean, the experience of refugee, it helps for legal stuff, whatever, but it's not really. No two experiences of refugees are the same. No two experiences of war are the same. No two experiences of trauma are the same. These are all like just ways of us communicating. And if we open ourselves to people, I think that people will appreciate that. They will feel heard, and maybe that conversation might even heal something in them, might make them trust a little bit, maybe more. So this, having an open-minded approach, I think, can have very positive consequences, maybe far more than that simple conversation could really change. I mean, when we think of ourselves, a lot of the time, simple stuff, simple interactions change our way, our beliefs and emotions in a very profound way. And just like how it happens to us, I believe it could happen to other people as well.
Qusai, are there two things that you think most people could do in their lives to impact positively what we have been talking about? Two suggestions that you would give us.
Well, I suppose leave your comfort zone of the people that you usually talk to. Meet people outside of your comfort zone. I think that's something that we can all do. And don't run away from uneasiness in a conversation. Don't run away from difficult emotions when you hear them coming from another person. Just stay where you are. I think maybe these two things can if I ask anybody hearing this, I think we can do, and they can really make a big difference. If we all do this, imagine how the world would be. Imagine how amazing and beautiful and connected the world could be if we all just step a little bit outside of our comfort zone and just stayed a little bit more in situations that are felt uneasy without reacting, just responding. I think that would be a nice world. So
nice. What are you looking at in the future? How can people reach you? Who would you like to hear from, and so on?
The thing that I am looking forward to do in my work. So I'm finishing my PhD relatively soon, and one of the things that I'm hoping to continue doing is, of course, I want to serve refugees, especially children. And one thing I want to do is focus on economic empowerment, because I think a lot of the work that I've done before, it's helping maybe the ease the experience of displacement, helping address the mental health problems, and also address parenting through maybe focusing on the structural inequalities that the parent might face. Which is, I think, all of these are important, but in addition, I think what I want to do is focus on empowering families to become independent economically, because I don't think, no matter what, I don't think if you without economic empowerment, you will not have a dignified life. If you're unable to if you're always asking people for money, you're not going to have the life that you want, and
you have no agency.
You have no agency. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so you also have no power, because you have no agency. So I'm really passionate about I do want to, one of my sort of ambitions is to create an intervention where there's a family intervention that is tackling communication problems in the family, and they're addressing mental health problems, in addition helping refugee families start their own businesses, and
right.
Because it's all a system, right? If my family is doing well, if I'm when I go home, I feel sort of it's positive, and it's giving me a lot of energy. So it's going to be more motivating. So when I go back and I work, I'm going to do more there. And if I have a good work, and it's kind of earning income, that's going to help my family. So it's all the same thing. It's all one thing.
Systemic,
so my hope is
creative. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So my ambition is that to do this, I think I need help. This is not a one person's job. I think there's a lot of it's something that would require maybe a lot of maybe partnership and sort of discussions and people. It's not as easy as I would hope so.
As you just out into the world and doing it. Yes.
Yeah. But we do things not because they're easy, but because they're important. So I'm really ambition is to sort of pursue this idea. So if people are if they have if they have any ideas about this, or they can please reach out to me. And I suppose the other thing, I do want to put more effort into translating some of the findings that we have with the people of concern. I realize a lot of the stuff that the research that we do is published in journals that either people cannot access for free, or if they can, it's written in a language that you need. It's very difficult for you need to speak English and read English. A, B, the level of language is academic. It's not accessible to most people, really. So I do want to put effort later on. So it's of course I'm given the resources that I have at the moment, that's not always easy, but later on it's something that I want to kind of prioritize more. So and I suppose that's something I perhaps if there is somebody out there that they would wish to support us translating our work to people of concern, maybe that could be also something that I appreciate if people reach out for support there. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Rene.
Yeah. In conclusion, for me, one thing I've learned really, and I've really got to engage in and really understand from this discussion is that there is a group of people, a very large group of people that require me to be open-minded, to be receptive, and to understand that they deserve respect just like I do. Whether or not they're in our border, in my border that I felt is home, I can actually just give them and share with them the empathy and the respect and the dignity that they deserve because they deserve it. So in any case whereby I might be influential or get to meet any of these systems or the people running these systems, they need to understand this. And I think this could actually really help the world become a better place. And that's really my takeaway, Nicolas. How about you?
Yeah, you know, this is my field of work, and so I've been navigating an ocean with Qusai and you today that is rather familiar to me. But for me, it was insightful to understand the relationship between the protracted refugee situation, the Zimbardo experiment, and this limbo state in which their psychology is, and then how parenting happens in that limbo state, and how it's almost conditional that they should end up in many negative sort of interactions. And then, of course, I was very grateful for you sharing your story of you know, of growth and connection. And it makes me feel that you have always been a very sensitive person, Qusai, very sensitive child, and that you know, when you say we need to be open-minded, and in my mind it's like, well, if you want to be like Qusai, you need to be heart open-minded, heart open. You know, like it's the heart is what was allowing you to connect to these refugees without othering them. Your heart seemed to be inclusive in a way that many other people were not, and that's a quality that I so highly appreciate, and I love to cultivate as well. So yeah, that's where I've been touched for sure. Thank you, Qusai. We'll keep in touch, and I hope others will get in touch with you. And thank you so much for having come to contribute to this live.
My pleasure. And if you just one last thing, if you allow me to say briefly, because I think it's important. I just want to send a big thank you for all the people who helped me in my research, and of course, I mean, my family and friends who've gone, who have showed me a lot of things that I, you know, that made me the person who I am. But I just want to also say a big thank you for all the research assistants who've helped me in sort of doing all the research that I've did. My supervisor, Kristen Hadfield, Sophie Putt. Those are just Beatrice, and many other people who have been so influential and important in my PhD journey. That I, you know, without them, I wouldn't have been where I am today. So big thank you for them, and a big thank you for both of you for having me today, giving me the platform and the opportunity, and just, you know, being so patient and open with your time to allow me to share my story. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, really, it's a team effort. Thank you very much, everybody. So thank you to our audience, and thank you for all the viewers of this program in the future. We'll see you soon with All About Trauma